The Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years if we count both its western and eastern halves. At its peak, it controlled territories from Britain to the Euphrates, from the Rhine to the Sahara.
Oh, why?
Yet by the 5th century, the Western Empire had fragmented into successor kingdoms. The question is not whether Rome fell, but whether the seeds of its decline were present from the beginning. The empire's greatest strength was also its fundamental challenge. Rome succeeded by incorporating vast territories and diverse populations into a single administrative system. This expansion brought wealth, resources, and strategic depth. But it also created structural pressures that would compound over centuries. Distance was Rome's first persistent problem. The empire stretched across thousands of miles of varied terrain. Information traveled slowly. Orders from the center could take weeks or months to reach frontier provinces. Local governors needed autonomy to respond to immediate threats. Yet this same autonomy made centralized control difficult to maintain. The larger the empire grew, the harder it became to govern. As a unified whole, economic pressures accumulated gradually. The empire ran on taxation, and taxation required administration. As military needs increased and bureaucracy expanded, so did costs. Historians suggest that by the 3rd century, the tax burden on many provinces had grown severe. Agriculture remained the foundation of wealth, yet productivity gains were limited by available technology. When the empire stopped expanding, the flow of conquest wealth slowed, forcing greater reliance on existing revenue streams. Currency debasement followed economic strain. Evidence indicates that Roman coins were progressively diluted with base metals over several centuries. This created inflation and undermined confidence in imperial currency. Trade patterns shifted. Long-distance commerce became less reliable as political instability grew in later centuries. Regional economies turned inward, weakening the economic integration that had bound the empire together. Administrative complexity increased with every reform meant to solve it. The imperial bureaucracy grew larger and more elaborate over time. More officials meant more salaries, more corruption opportunities, and more layers between the emperor and local realities. Research points to a system that became progressively rigid, less able to adapt to changing circumstances. Rules multiplied. Flexibility diminished. Social cohesion faced steady erosion. Early Rome had benefited from a strong civic culture and military service that bound citizens to the state. Over time, citizenship expanded until it included nearly everyone in the empire. This was a triumph of inclusion, but it also diluted the special relationship between citizen and state. Military service shifted from citizen soldiers to professional armies, often recruited from frontier populations with weak ties to Rome itself. The empire increasingly relied on people who had little personal stake in its survival. Environmental factors played a role that historians are still piecing together. Climate studies suggest that the Roman climate optimum, a period of favorable weather, may have supported agricultural expansion during Rome's peak. Later centuries saw increased climate variability. Plague outbreaks in the 2nd and 3rd centuries reduced population in many regions. These were not catastrophic collapses, but gradual pressures that weakened the empire's human and agricultural resources over generations. Frontier became increasingly porous. Rome had always absorbed outsiders, incorporating them through military service, trade, and settlement. But as military pressures increased and administrative resources stretched thin, this integration became less controlled. Groups crossed the frontiers not just as individuals, but as communities, seeking land and security. The empire lacked the capacity to absorb these migrations while maintaining its traditional structures. Adaptation grew harder as the system aged. Earlier centuries had seen significant institutional reforms when crises emerged. Later emperors attempted reforms as well, but the empire's very size and complexity made change difficult. Vested interests multiplied. Regional differences deepened. What worked in Egypt might fail in Gaul. Uniform solutions became less effective, even as the desire for uniformity remained. No single factor doomed Rome. Instead, structural challenges inherent in maintaining a vast, diverse empire accumulated over centuries. Geographic overextension strained governance. Economic pressures mounted as costs rose and revenues stagnated. Administrative complexity increased, even as flexibility decreased. Social bonds weakened, while military demands intensified. Environmental shifts and demographic changes added further stress. The Western Empire did not collapse suddenly in 476. That date marks a political transition. But the processes of transformation had been underway for generations. Provinces had been breaking away, reorganizing, finding new forms of governance. Trade networks had shifted. Power had localized. By the time the last Western emperor was deposed, the empire as a functioning system had already transformed into something else. Whether Rome was doomed from the start is perhaps the wrong question. No human institution lasts forever. Rome's particular structure created both its success and its eventual limits. The centralized administration that unified the Mediterranean became a burden when growth stopped. The military that conquered an empire required resources that eventually exceeded sustainable taxation. The very scale that made Rome powerful made it vulnerable to slow, accumulated pressures. What we can say is this: the Roman Empire faced inherent tensions between size and control, between expansion and sustainability, between uniformity and diversity. These tensions were manageable during periods of growth and favorable conditions. Over time, as circumstances changed and stresses accumulated, those same tensions became harder to resolve. Decline was not inevitable from the beginning, but it emerged from the gradual accumulation of structural pressures that the imperial system, for all its sophistication, could not ultimately overcome. The lessons extend beyond Rome itself. Large-scale systems, whether empires or institutions, face similar challenges across history. Success creates expectations and structures that become difficult to change. Growth masks underlying problems until growth stops. What functions well at one scale may fail at another. Rome's experience suggests that the very mechanisms that build great civilizations can, over sufficient time, contribute to their transformation. The empire's decline was neither mysterious nor sudden, but rather the natural result of stresses that accumulated slowly, persistently across generations until the old structures could no longer hold. Understanding Rome's trajectory requires patience with complexity. Historical explanations that point to single causes or defining moments often miss the deeper patterns. The empire's transformation unfolded across centuries, shaped by countless decisions, conditions, and circumstances that interacted in ways contemporaries could not fully grasp. We see the pattern now only because we have the distance of time and the tools of historical analysis that allow us to trace these long, slow processes of change.